Good afternoon and welcome to today's presentation, Inside Retail Store Safety. The information presented by the expert is not to be used as legal advice and does not indicate a working relationship with the expert. All materials obtained from this presentation are merely for educational purposes and should not be used in a court of law. In today's webinar, Bob will discuss retail store safety for use in premises liability casework, typical types of cases that occur in the retail store, areas where these types of injuries often occur, management issues, resources for standards within the industry. To give you a little background about our presenter, Mr. Robert Loderstedt, he has more than 30 years of experience in retail safety and has been involved in assisting both plaintiffs and defense attorneys as an expert in safety since 1996. His expertise is in liability cases in retail, warehousing, distribution centers, and manufacturing. Bob has worked as a manufacturer of material handling equipment and was president of a full-service forklift dealership. He has provided written opinions in more than 200 cases and supported attorneys in another 70 cases. Bob has testified at a regional OSHA hearing, providing input on how operator safety training can be improved. Bob is also a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. Bob also has experience with cases involving subrogation. Attendees who require a passcode, the word for today is store. During the Q&A session, we ask that you enter this passcode into the Q&A widget for the CLE reporting purposes. The Q&A is located to the left of your screen. Please remember that if you are applying for CLE credit, you must log onto your computer as yourself and stay for the full 60 minutes. You are also required to complete the survey at the end of the program. Please note that CLE credit cannot be given to those watching together on a single computer. Tomorrow morning, I will send out an email with a link to the archive recording of the webinar. The slides can be downloaded from the resource list at the widget at the bottom of your screen. Thank you all for attending today. And Bob, the presentation is now turned over to you.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Naja. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming on board. You can call me Bob. You know the title, Inside Retail Store Safety. And the objective that I have established for this is to provide, and I'm sure we have some defense folks and we have plaintiff folks online here, is to provide you with more intelligence. You actually get the intelligence. You have a lot of information you get that sits on your desk, but you don't often get intelligence. So my objective is to get you intelligence about retail store safety that you can use in your premise liability cases. And the outcome from this presentation would be that the attorneys in attendance are going to strengthen their cases, strategy, and approach, ensuring more favorable case outcomes. Now, the approach that I like to suggest attorneys think about is that people inspect what they expect. So when you start involvement in a case, you want to be able to determine if management established strategies and tactics concerning health and safety practices and ensure that they're being used for protection of customers and employees, and that they deploy those policies and procedures, and that they provide initial and ongoing training to managers and employees. That's really critical to arrive at a situation where if they've not done that, you've got something clear to talk about. If they've done that and you're on the defense side, you've got something clear to talk about. So you want to understand what the management's doing in regard to that. And that they've implemented mechanisms to sustain that safe environment. And they do proactive analysis, that the risk management people are looking at incident data. They should either across a region or maybe across the company or in a particular store be doing analysis to determine patterns that may exist within that store or in that group of stores. And that type of activity can alert them to areas within a store where maybe they need to take some action to tweak how that area of the store functions to reduce incidents to customers. And benchmarking, the degree to which they benchmark and review retail industry best practices and management operations, risk management and safety, and visual merchandising and store design. So those are the kind of things you want to follow up on in addition to determining that management is doing the types of things that they're supposed to be doing. So some information on retail stores. There's about a little over 39,000 total supermarkets with 2 million plus in sales. You can see, I won't read into you, the top 15 retailers by sales. Most of those players are still probably in that position or somewhere within that top 15 or 20 or 30 store retailers. Within the industry, 60% of the general liability claims filed against the grocery store industry are a result of slips and fall complaints. And the industry, grocery stores, spend $450 million in annual average dollars in defense of slip and fall claims. And that's just grocery stores. So you have outside of that the box stores. You have the Kohl's and places like that. Nowadays, Target and Walmart would be pulled in under that grocery. And then the average spent per store on a defense is $12,480. So there's a lot of money that gets involved with these cases. And it behooves everyone to make sure they're doing the right stuff to either save on dollars or optimize dollars, depending on what happens in a particular case or an incident. Now, within the industry, the types of incidents involve slips, which are liquids, and that can be water, that can be soda, that could be transmission fluid, that could be anything that is formed into a liquid. Yogurt, I've had cases involving yogurt. You also get produce on the floor in the produce department or elsewhere in the store. You have eggs, you have hangers, you have shelf tags. I recently settled a case where there was those round tags that go on the top of hangers that give you the size, small, medium, large, extra large. That had fallen on the floor and someone had slipped and fell. So those size tags also can come into play. And then you have equipment leaks, you have grease, you have inclement weather with ice and snow, you have debris, that's plastic, paper, that's cardboard, it's plastic banding. So a number of types of things under that category are what create slips. On your trips, you have to watch mats. Mats will tend to curl. I'm sure most of you know that as carts are being brought into a store, if the carts are being pushed over mats, that can scrunch up that mat. Someone can catch their toe on it, not necessarily fall, but now you have a mat that's crunched up and the person coming behind may well trip and fall. You have product that they can trip over that's been left in an aisle. You have displays, and I'm sure most of you know that based on customs and practices in the industry, 3 feet is the minimum height you can have for a display on a floor. Anything below 3 feet, it's got to be replenished or it's got to be taken off the floor. You have hand baskets. A lot of times hand baskets are left in aisles. People can walk down that aisle. If they don't see it, they're not looking down. They trip on the hand basket. Pallets and presentation platforms, bread trays, clothes racks, product carts, any number of things that wind up having people trip and fall and get hurt. And then you have falling items. You have things that fall from the displays. You have cases that will fall. You have boxes that fall. You have signs. You have merchandise. And then you have the material handling equipment that gets involved here, where you have typically electric pallet jacks, manual pallet jacks. You have U-boats. You have forklifts. You have conditions where something gets pushed through in a Menards or a Restaurant Depot. For those of you that are from Florida north, there's an outfit called Restaurant Depots where they have a lot of push-throughs. And a push-through is when an operator is elevating a load to put it away in a rack, perhaps at the 3rd level, and they move it in too far and they push out product or the actual pallet with product from the opposite side. That falls. They don't have the out closed off, and you have significant injuries in that regard. So areas of a supermarket. Now, I spent time working with a guy by the name of Bill Giulio, who'd been in the industry for about 25, 30 years. And based on an analysis of 1,100 cases he had done, he did an analysis that showed in that work that he had done in the supermarket, you can see these numbers. 32% of the incidents occur in the grocery aisle. Produce is 25, checkout is 12, front door is 7, dairy is 6, and meat is 5. So that just gives you a feel for where the preponderance of these things occur. And if you get an analysis like this that's done at a store level, they can at least use this to try to figure out how do they improve some of that stuff so they don't have those incidents. Management and their responsibility as it relates to safety. Within the industry, it starts with the ownership, the store leadership, the risk management, loss prevention people, the middle-level store management, and then the employees. So that's kind of a hierarchy. Although everyone has responsibility for safety, the ownership of it on down is what really has to provide the guidance and the oversight and inspect what they expect to be done. So if they're doing scheduled inspections, that has to be audited, or the manager has to inspect what they expect relative to that type of activity being done. You just can't say it's got to be done and not audit it, not follow up on it. The industry defenses that typically crop up in these cases are notice. Well, you know, if we had notice about that rain in the foyer-way, we would have mopped it up. My response to that is, you know about rain. You know you've had rain in that area any number of times. You've really been put on notice over the years. Customer responsibilities, and well, it was only an isolated incident. You know, we really haven't had any. We've never had one in that part of the store. But that really doesn't carry any weight relative to what they did or didn't do to satisfy their duty to exercise reasonable care to keep the store safe and exercise reasonable duties, or their duty to exercise reasonable care to keep the aisles safe for customers. So that's the way I think about a response to those types of defenses. Okay, at this juncture, if anyone has any questions, you can ask away or you can type it in. So we'll see if anyone has any questions up to this. Go ahead.
Yes, and while you're typing your questions, please feel free to type in the passcode, which is store. I don't see any questions.
Okay. That's good.
Okay. Yes, you can continue on, Bob.
Yeah, it's simple enough. Everybody got it? Good. So the question I might pose is, you know, is it negligence on the part of a store, or is it a negligent mode of operation? Where does that fall out? And I'm suggesting it can be both. Because if you can show this sustained pattern of behavior that demonstrates non-acceptance or conformance with the regulatory and retail industry customs and practices or standards, and ensures suggestions and recommendations, and the company's own documentation or lack thereof, then I think you have an argument for a negligent mode of operation and definitely negligence. So depending on the state, the mode of operation has a lot more weight. Studies have shown the best defense is to have in place the things you say you're going to do that meet customs and practices of the industry. Do it on a scheduled basis. Train, retrain your people. You've got to continually be retraining, and you got to document that you did it. This is just a quote from Brett Johnson from this action auditing, where he basically talks about the best defense for a defendant is to have these standards, to do these things, to document them, and that gives them added strength and coverage, so to speak, if they go to trial. Now, where do you turn to bolster and thwart your industry defenses? One of the first places you want to do is you want to investigate the company's documented philosophy and what are their values and what are their strategies and tactics, where you find them in their websites, in their policies, practices, and procedures, in their corporate governance, in their ethical standards and responsibilities, These are places that you can look to see what those philosophies and values and strategies and tactics are. And that's critical as you begin to put your case together. The other place to look, if you have big companies, a Walmart, a Target, a Kohl's, companies of that size, if you get a hold of their 10K, they have to put a 10K out for the SEC every year. If you get a hold of the 10K, you'll find that many of them have references safety in that 10K. And that's actually put out, and it's the responsibility of the CEO and the board of directors. So you have pretty good authority there if you find something that they say they should have, but you don't see it in a particular case. That's just more ammunition from your perspective. Regulatory and retail industry customs and practices or standards. You have some standards in ANSI, and if you have material handling equipment involved, that could be a U-boat. You have an OSHA standard that comes into play. And then you have the industry influencers, Liberty Mutual, Farmers, Grocery Insurance, or Grocers Insurance, Zurich, CNA. They publish things out to their client base, and it's on the internet. And it talks about how to make sure you keep your produce area safe. It talks about how you deal with mats. So those are areas where you can gather additional information that become customs and practices when you get involved with your cases. Now, when you build your case, it's you know this. It's interrogatories, it's requests for production, and it's depositions and admissions. So some of the things that you want to get a hold of is a copy of the record retention policy. Now, a lot of times they'll balk at that, but if you can get that, and the reason you want to get the record retention policy is if they're supposed to retain incident reports for 3 years, and they tell you in a response to a request for production of documents, well, they only keep them for a year. You know, factually, you've gotten from headquarters that they retain them for 3 years. So now you've got some arguments you can make about it's pretty difficult to figure out whether or not there's a pattern here without having access to the data. And then you want to establish a degree of documents on current policies and procedures that the store does scheduled store inspections or sweeps. Typically, they're done hourly, but based on customer traffic and based on events that may be occurring, that could go down to every 30 minutes. If you have snowstorm and inclement weather, that could be 15 minutes checking the store. The first time you have corn coming out that's over in produce, you should have somebody almost standing there because you're going to get the silk and you're going to get the coverings of the corn are going to wind up outside that one garbage can they put there. So you want to have somebody there to make sure that stuff gets picked up. And then the recording of the inspections, and you want initial and refresher training of employees, both in the recording of the inspections and conducting the inspections. And it's not just looking at the floor as they go through these inspections or sweeps. They need to be looking for potential falling merchandise. They need to be looking at these floor displays that might be out there. So it's not just looking at the floor. There's other things they need to be trained on by management so that they satisfy their duty. There's typically 2 electronic systems. One is by a company called Gleason, and one is by a company called Clean Sweep. Those are probably the best because it logs in electronically the time, and it gives 3 buttons on a wand they carry that can tell you whether or not they cleaned up a wet hazard or a dry hazard or the floor is clear. So those are some that you want to make, and you want to make sure you get the information from them. A little bit later on, I'll talk about that, why you want to get and request in your supplementary request for production of documents, copies of the handwritten incident reports or copies of the Gleason or Clean Sweep documentation that they can readily access and get to you. Initial and refresher training of the employees in overall safety with slips, trips, falls, and struck-bys. So you want to make sure that the employees are getting initial training, and most times that happens when they're brought on board. But there's very little refresher training that occurs. And if these folks don't get refresher training, they're not going to necessarily do what you need them to do to keep the store safe. Then you have your safety committees. They should be meeting at least monthly at a minimum, scheduled meetings, agendas, minutes, and refresher training for those employees. So I can't emphasize the training. I was going to a local Harris Teeter this morning, and I saw the store manager was training a new employee how to pull 15 shopping carts into the store and how they attach them and how that gets in the store. And I asked him if he was going to do any refresher training. He said, oh, yeah, I'll be watching him tomorrow. If he doesn't do it the right way, he'll be getting refresher training. So even to something like bringing carts in, where typically most stores will not allow more than 15 carts at a time to be brought in, you got to be training employees on it. I mean, they don't know what they don't know. So training is absolutely key in these situations. Store management, documenting the audits that they make of the above activities we just talked about. So are they inspecting what they expect these folks to do when they're doing scheduled inspections every 30 minutes? Are they logging them in on a manual log or in the Gleason system or the Clean Sweep system? And then proactive analysis. You got to investigate these incidents. You just can't put, they slipped on ice. And they always, because these reports always say, you did an investigation. What happened? So you got to make sure, if you're the manager, that these documents are being completed so that there's some understanding of what and why the ice and how the ice found its way onto the floor. So those are things you want to look for, whether you're on the plaintiff side or the defense side. I mean, you want to understand that. And it's going to help the defense attorney, if he can get the kind of answers that bolster his position, that, well, hey, they do that. Here's what happened. And then you want to copy the incident reports, what I talked about. And typically you want to try to get 2 years. I don't think you're going to get 2. The most I've ever gotten was 18 years of manual, and I've gotten 10 or 12 months of the electronic. But get those, and you can do an analysis of that, and I'll share a little bit later some things that I found when I went through some of this analysis. And then copies of police reports. You can get these from your police department. It doesn't cost much money. It's basically anytime an ambulance, and the police department, a police officer and the ambulance were called to a particular store. Could be a ShopRite, could be a Safeway, whatever. So you can actually have documentation as to when that occurred. And in a lot of cases, there'll be something written in there as to what happened with the accident. Where did the individual fall? What might they have fallen on? Did they fall on yogurt? So you can pick up additional information that way from the police reports. And then you have your store surveillance videos, and good luck, but you should ask for a minimum of 2 hours pre and 2 hours post of the incident. I don't know how many store surveillance videos I've seen, more than I want to see, but it's always interesting if they give you some decent time, the kind of things you find when you get basically near the end of the tape. That's when you get the manager walking back to the front entrance and straightening out the mat so that the mats are now perfectly straight. So they do a lot of remediation that you're not watching that video through to the end. You're going to lose a lot of valuable information. Copy of their written safety policy, and then job descriptions. Job descriptions of the store manager, if it's in produce, the produce manager, if it's in dairy or frozen, the dairy frozen manager's job description, the grocery manager's, because reading through those, you'll find whether or not they're really committed to safety and what their role might be in that relative to their area of the store. And I'll show you an example of a job description that I had in a case I went through. Training records and training material. So you want to find out the employees that might have been involved in this situation. If they abandoned a spill and there was an incident, you want to have a copy of the training records and what material were they trained on. You want to get their key performance indicators, metrics and goals relative to safety. They have lots of metrics and lots of goals in a grocery store, but I have yet in whatever it is, the number of cases I've been involved with. I've yet to see any that are related to safety, like reduce in 2020 by 15% the number that we had in 2019. So if they had 20 slips and falls in 2019, reduce that by 3 and get no more than 17. So those are important things to get if they have it, because then you can double check to see how they did. Your depositions, you want to think about who you depose and the sequencing and get help developing those questions. And I'm sure you all know this. You want to ask why 3 times. You don't want to ask it in a row. Why? But when they give you an answer, why was that, why did you answer that way? And then maybe 10 minutes later, you kind of circle back to a similar question and tell me again why you felt this or you stated this. And then maybe toward the end, one more time, just tell me one more time why you answered this question this way. And usually by the 3rd time, you get the real answer. The 30B6 witnesses, they're important because they can give you operationally what's going on. They really don't have the documentation in detail as to what happened with the incident, but they can help you with things like, so tell me about the inspection process you have. Tell me about the documentation. Tell me how often this happens. Tell me how often that happens. And you can kind of get the information you need that'll help you put together your case. And then you want to think about deposing the CEO or the president, depending on the facts of the case. But I've been involved in a couple of cases where we did depose the president of the company, and I've actually had several companies I've been the president of. And it's interesting because as the president, you lay out a safety policy and you lay out to your people what you would like to see done as it relates to safety in the store to keep employees and customers safe. And in reality, when you get the president talking about that, and now a little further down in the depots, you start to bring in the grocery clerk or, the night manager or whatever, it's like, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't hear about that. I wasn't aware we had to do that. So it's pretty interesting. Or you get a president that really has no idea what's going on. And that doesn't bode well because that from the top, everything starts from the top and cascades down. And I always say a fish stinks from the head down. So if you don't have a president interested in what goes on from a safety standpoint of employees and customers, that's a store I don't think I'd shop in. And then we have the infamous store site visit. And that's when the band comes back together. We're all going to meet at 9:30 at this store. And sure enough, all the defense people are there. All the plaintiff people are there. The experts are there. Everybody else is there. And the party begins. When you have those site visits, I've always suggested they really have no value because if that store visit started at 9:30, I was in that store probably 8 o'clock if it was open, looking to see what happens. And I've had several times when an attorney would come in and they'd actually go into an aisle and walk the aisle where the incident occurred to make sure that everything was picked up, there was no potential hazards, there was nothing like that. You see them talking to the employees, when these people come in, don't say a word, look at me before you answer, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think the store site visit has much credence, unless you have something, a monument or something, it's a case, it's a coffin case where water leaked out of, and you want to have your experts see that. But by and large, everything's kind of staged. It's like when you're trying to sell your house and you stage your house. That's kind of what happens when everybody gets there. But there are times when you want the site visit with both parties there. And then the last thing is what I call a store shopping visit, where you just go into the store and you walk the store and you take a look at what might have happened in an incident area, or you just want to see how that store is doing. I typically get out a couple times a week to different retailers where I walk the store. And when I'm done, I might ask for the manager, tell them who I am. I'm involved in retail safety, nothing with your particular store, but I just want to tell you how clean the store is. I noticed your folks doing scheduled inspections. I didn't see any hazards in the store. well done, congratulations. Other times I might say to them, you know, I notice over here with the pickles and the olive bar, you have no mat. So I might ask for the deli manager, and I'll ask the deli manager, I don't see you have a mat down in front of the olive bar. Is there a reason for that? And I remember the one time the guy said, well, yeah, nobody told me to put one down. You know, the shirts didn't tell me I should do it. And I just suggested to them, I tell them who I am, what I do, nothing with your store, but that is unsafe because you've got oil that is going to drop to the floor. And you might want to talk to your boss about that to get mats in there before you have a problem. So that's another reason to just get into the store and see what's going on. Further building your case, you want to go into the restroom. Restrooms typically have these handwritten checklists. You may want to take a picture of that. Simply because if they're not doing scheduled inspections and logging them in, you can speak to the restroom checklist that gets signed off on hourly when they go in and they clean up the restroom. I spoke to you earlier about the SEC filing the 10K. You want to be able to take a look at those 10Ks. I'm not going to read it to you, but I'll give you a minute to take a look at it. That example of a retail store code of ethics, you can take a look at that and you can see from the president or the CEO and the board, they put some thought in and responsibility to making the store safer for employees and customers. I won't tell you who this company is, but they don't really do a great job of implementing. And that's a case where if you get the president of the company on a deposition, they may just reference the 10K, and your response can be, yeah, well, unfortunately, at the store level, they don't do this. They don't have a safety program. So you can think about that. Slips and falls on liquids in frozen dairy meat and bagged ice. This is for the store manager. So you want to obtain this in discovery, and you can put these kind of questions in a deposition. For slips and falls in those areas, the last time the frozen case was serviced by the company or outside maintenance, sometimes the company, the manager, if it's a clogged drain, the manager may be able to clear that, or if it's something that they can actually fix, they'll do it. Otherwise, they got to call outside maintenance. And then the last time the freezer case was power washed, and again, that's sometimes done by outside service people. Other times it's done by employees. It's usually done by employees. I had a case where an employee had to clean out the milk cases. So he brings these bossies out and he starts hosing them down outside of the milk case and leaves a puddle of water that just starts running all over the place. And a customer walks in and slips on the water and down they go. So sometimes when they service it or clean it with an employee, they need to make sure that you're training those employees on how they want to wash these things down, and they're not necessarily done where customers are going to be walking around. The last time the freezer case had a reset, and that again could be outside service, or that could be employees, or that could be a supplier, could be resetting that case. The last time any freezer case in the entire store that were called out for an emergency service due to leaks, power outages, anything that related to the disabling of the case. And when you ask for that, you also want to get copies of the technician's paperwork. So when the tech was called out because there was a leak, you want to get a copy of the handwritten service record that they made. And don't let them tell you, or don't let them give you the one that's been loaded in the computer, because the tech turns that in, and then that gets typed in the computer. And when they give you that typed into the computer, you don't necessarily get everything that the technician put down. Now, I ran a forklift dealership, and I had about 25 technicians, and I can tell you factually, when they fill out that service record, they also make sure that that third and fourth copy, one of those goes in a folder behind the back seat of their van, because they want to make sure they're covered if there's ever an incident. So make sure you ask for that stuff, because it's interesting. If you can get a few that they were called out several days before the incident, and you see that that clearly was not fixed, well, now you got a case where they just totally disregarded getting it fixed or giving authorization to the outside vendor to fix that leak. The name of the HVAC company that does the preventative maintenance and repairs, freezers, coolers, and then a copy of the service contract with duties and responsibilities. So those are things that you want to get. I guess maybe, Najir, can I ask if anybody's got any questions at this point?
Yes, we actually have a lot of questions.
Oh, we do? Okay. If
yes.
you guys and gals and ladies and gentlemen want to go for them now, let's do that.
Okay. So our first question, is there a maximum height for displays?
3 feet. The maximum? No, not. Oh, I'm sorry, maximum. You asked me maximum. I'd like to tell you yes, but I have not seen any of that in writing. But typically, they should not be. They should be at a level that a customer can reach. And the average height of a female, I think, is 5'3" by the National Health Agency, and a male's about 5'7" or 5'8". So anything that's typically over 6 feet, you can typically make an argument that it's just too high. It's just too high, and it needed to be brought down to a lower level. So you got to be careful of that. There's a phrase in the industry, stack them high and watch them fly, which just means pack out as much as you can in these displays, as high as you can, and you just are creating all kinds of issues. So if you're a defense attorney and you happen to be in a store with one of your customers, and you see that kind of a display, you certainly want to bring that to somebody's attention, because you do get that falling merchandise. Somebody's up reaching that one height, and they just twist it, bringing it down, and it hits something next to it, and down that comes, and now you got all kinds of problems. So it's typically an average height that somebody could reach, which would be, maybe 5'5", 5'8", or maybe a max of 6 feet. But there's not a lot of places that you'll find that in customs and practices and standards.
So, Bob, as a follow-up, is there a minimum height for the displays?
Yeah, the minimum height, I thought I mentioned that. Maybe I didn't, but I thought I did. It's 3 feet. Anytime a display sells down below 3 feet, it needs to be replenished, or if the pallet's empty, like you see cases of water. So if that sells down, and again, just if you're walking, like my hip is 3 feet. So I always know when I walk in a store, if something's below the height of my hip, it's below 3 feet. And that's when they have to replenish, or they have to remove that display, that empty display. Either it's a platform, like in a retailer, like a Century 21 or something. Those are platform displays. Supermarkets, they typically build them up on pallets. So that's a max of 3 feet. So that's a max of 3 feet. Next question.
Okay. This one is, I assume that criminal acts of a third party towards a customer is a separate case?
Well, yeah, it would be. I don't get involved in criminal acts. I get involved in the kind of stuff we've been talking about, but a criminal act, that would be I guess a potential case, but you'd have to find an expert that deals with that stuff. I want to make sure, did I answer that question for you?
Yes.
Okay.
Are there particular guidelines for using pallets for displays in stores?
A pallet can be used, but again, you have to watch how high you stack the pallet, and then you have to watch that you have a minimum height of 3 feet. The other thing you want to be very careful of is, as you know, pallets, you can actually have your foot caught in that pallet and you can trip. So if you have they have what's known as pallet guards. They're typically a thick cardboard material that are used, and they're decorative. and they're wrapped around the pallet in any area where a foot could potentially get into that pallet. So if you think about a pallet, on each one of the four corners, there's an area where if you turned too sharply, your foot could go into that corner of the pallet, and now you wind up tripping and going down. The purpose of the pallet guard is so that people's eye will be brought to that, and they'll avoid that tripping situation. So the pallet guard can prevent an incident where somebody trips on it. You make sure you monitor the below 3 feet displays, and you don't let these heights on these displays get up to 9, 10 feet. You want to keep them down at a reasonable height.
Okay, next question. What is the role of store surveillance and video? Is the standard of care required that stores maintain and have video surveillance practices and procedures with respect to store safety?
Well, it's the store's decision to install surveillance video. In my experience, far more times than not, when you get a response to the video and you ask, well, why do you have that video? It's really about theft. It's really not about safety. It's very, very rarely will I have read in a deposition that they use it also for safety. It's typically used for theft. But when they have it, they typically will have somewhere in their manual that and it also would say it on the incident report, they need to pull a copy of that incident off of the tape. Now, some places it's a pretty hard time to get it. If you get it, they don't want to give it to you right away. Sometimes they've erased over it. It's any number of things, but you really want to get preservation letter out. I mean, if you can, it's easy for me to say, but if you can get a preservation letter out in that first 30 days, at least now you can be protected by spoliation if somehow there's no video, and yet there's 2 cameras looking down that aisle of video cameras. So that's my thought, my advice, and my experience on surveillance videos. And when you get them, try to get as much as you can. Try to get as much as you can. Because sometimes you get 6 seconds after the fall, or you just get the fall, and it's pretty hard to, obtain additional information as to what you can use to show there might have been some negligence on the part of the store. Next. Hello.
My apologies. Yes, Bob, my apologies.
Oh.
I have a question for you. So are stores like Costco responsible for allowing customers to push heavy flatbed carts down the aisle where the cart is hard to control and stop to avoid a collision with a shopper pushing a basket?
I've been involved in several of those. My own opinion is I agree with you. They're not really safe. And sometimes you look at the people that are pushing them and it makes it even more unsafe. I've asked them. I mean, I shop at Costco periodically, and I've asked the managers, why do you do that? Well, we do that because the customers need that to get the product out, because they're buying 4 of the paper towels, 4 of the toilet papers. They're getting cases of this, cases of that, and they need that. I said, but it's not like you train them or anything. Well, we don't, but we think it's common sense. And that's kind of the answer you get, So that's when you just have to try to make an argument that this client had no real experience or exposure to moving these things around. It's no different than having an employee who builds a load on a U-boat 7 feet high and they can't see over it. And then they run into a customer. So where's the training? Where's the thought process on the part of the store to make sure that the employee is not loading this U-boat up to 7 feet high? So yeah, I think they're unsafe, but that would be a net opinion, you know. I haven't really seen a lot of stuff in the manuals that talk about the L carts and making sure that somebody's got some training or what have you. That would be my guidance on that and experience.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Now, Bob, we do have more questions, but did you want to finish your presentation and then we could wrap up with those questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do that. Okay.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
All right. So the next thing is I talk about the court, and you more than likely, in a lot of your cases, you really need to educate the judge as to why you need what you're asking for. Because a lot of times they may say, well, what do you need the record retention policy for? And we talked about that. You need that because they told you they throw these things out after 1 year. And you want to know if that record retention policy says, which is the corporate, you hold on to them for 3 years. So as long as you got a rationale, I would think most judges will once understanding it, compel them to produce that in your supplemental request for production of documents. So just be thinking about that, because if you can just explain the rationale behind wanting it, a lot of times these judges are going to say, yeah, you're right, it makes sense to me. So you go from there. Now, some of the situations I've run into, just to give you a flavor and a feel, this is a case where there was a Gleason system. That's the electronic one that I talked about, where they use a wand. An employee is trained, they have a wand, and they have a map of the store floor where they have these devices that you have to touch as you walk through to do your inspection. So you leave the service desk, you walk down to station 1. As you're walking, you're looking to make sure there's no hazards. If there's no hazards, when you get there, you touch the button and you push clean. If you get to number 13 and there's some debris on the ground, you push the button, you were there, you hit the debris button, and then you move on to the next location. So in this particular case, I had 10 months worth of data, and there were supposed to be 14 scheduled inspections every day. I mean, the stack of paper I got was probably 2 feet high. So I had 10 months of data. They were supposed to do 14 scheduled inspections every day, and there were 304 days involved here. On 64 of those 304 days, or 20% of the days, no scheduled inspections at all occurred. The lowest number that occurred on a day was 1.5, and the highest was 5.85. So here's a case where you invest money in a system that can really give you good information, and there's nothing here. I mean, there's nothing here you could use for a defense. What are you going to say? Oh, I did 1.5 one of these days, you know, as I didn't get to the 14, you know, or I had 64 days where I didn't get to the 14 inspections. It just, you know, I don't think it rings true if you ever wind up in court and you're talking to a jury about it. Juries are not stupid. They know what's going on. Here's another one. This is another incident report analysis. This was paper incident reports. I had 28 months of reports. The average, there was 1.4 customer incidents per month. They were slipping on liquids, which was that particular case, and 62.5% of those incident reports involved liquids. And now they had morning and afternoon porters. And when I did that analysis on when did it occur, 85% of the incidents occurred in the afternoon. And this incident occurred at 3 p.m. And as I said, they had 6 porters working on the incident day. They could have scheduled one of those porters, adding to a 4th one in the afternoon, and more likely than not, they would have found that hazard versus leaving 3 and 3. So there was a case where the analysis was at least able to show, wait a minute, you did have an alternative. If you had done this kind of analysis, you would have seen that you really only needed 2 porters in the morning, and you still would have had the store covered sufficiently. And yet, with that fourth one, you would have had one more person, a factor of 25% more, looking out for the hazard, and you may well have found that hazard. So another reason why you want to try to get this stuff and do that analysis. Job descriptions. This is the store manager. There was no documented safety responsibilities for the store manager in that document. There was no involvement with the safety committee and no metrics for safety. That document was 680 words in that job description. 680 words. It took me a long time to count it because I kept losing count. But when I got to 680, the first mention of safety, the word safety, was on page 473, and that was keep the store safe. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't say that's a incredible job of providing guidance and goals and metrics for the store manager when it comes to safety in the store. So, and I would think if you told that story to a jury, my guess is a jury would be shaking their head. You know, how committed are they to safety? Let me help you understand what the store manager has as a job description, which is supposed to give him guidance on what he's supposed to do or what she's supposed to do. And again, this comes back to the staffs. This is headquarters in a lot of cases. Headquarters does these job descriptions. It doesn't get done at the local level. So here's a case where I did some field observations. In this one particular case, this was hand baskets. This was a case where there was a ShopRite in New Jersey where they picked up hand baskets on this four-wheel dolly, and they would just walk around under the registers. They'd grab the hand baskets, they'd stack them up, and they had a stack that was like, I don't know, 7 feet tall. They hit something, the stack falls over and hits this woman, and she gets some pretty bad injuries. So there's really nothing in the manuals about hand baskets. So I said, well, I got to go out and find out what's going on in the field. So I go to 22 locations across 13 chains and 2 states. And no one collected hand baskets in the manner of that defendant. They would either put them on those four-wheeled carts and use the bungee cables to lock them down, or they would put them in a shopping cart and take them to the front, or they would just carry them where they could see over them. They'd carry 3 or 4 at a time. But no one did it the way this ShopRite did it. So that obviously, that analysis helped us with that particular case. And then here's an excerpt from an actual safety manual. The version in 1997 said each member owner must personally choose one, and this was a special type of a employee. And then in 2004, that was changed to, it is suggested each member owner personally choose one. Now, in my experience, having had a corporate attorney in a couple of companies, those changes are a function of the corporate attorney getting in there and rewriting this thing. But the questions that were asked of the folks in the depositions was, how come in 1997 you must personally choose one? And how come, 7 years later, it winds up being suggested? Did you do so many incredible things that it wasn't really necessary to make it mandatory? It could be chosen? I don't think so. So this is the kind of stuff, if you're a defense attorney, this is the kind of stuff that gets you in trouble. It really does. I mean, imagine trying to justify that. If you're a defense attorney explaining how that happened, good luck. So let's talk about the future. This is my opinion. A continuation of the same type of cases are going to occur, I think, because the stores typically have $1 million in liability coverage, and the cost-benefit analysis, if they do it, to change their mode of operation may be too expensive. Now, the other reason is visual merchandising and store design, and let's talk about that. Retailers continue to employ visual merchandising and store design today because what it really is about an experience. and having customers feel good and having an overall satisfactory experience, and the results of which attracts more customers and increases sales. That's why they do visual merchandising and store design. Now, the kind of people that do this, let's talk about where it's deployed first. It's used in merchandise displays, how they build these displays to attract your attention and to draw your eye over to what the products are. They use color. The way you see color come into play is next time you're in the supermarket, take a look at the peppers. You'll typically see a line of red peppers, then you'll see green peppers, then you'll see orange peppers, and then you'll see yellow peppers. You'll also see in the summer or the spring or summer when the tomatoes come out, in front of the tomato display, you'll see a single stand-up display with ice in it, and it's got mozzarella cheese, and it's got basil. So now you got everything you need to be able to make a nice little appetizer before you serve dinner, and it's all right there for you, but you've got a potential issue as the store to make sure that you don't have that ice, that something's capturing any melt of that ice. And they use lighting design. They use signage. You see it on the floor in some cases now. They have themes, and then you have the actual layout of the store. So these are some of the ways that retailers are deploying visual merchandising and store design. Now, I always find this one fascinating because the folks that come out as visual merchandising folks, they understand architectural principles. They have understanding of psychology, design, fashion psychology, inventory, and they're very creative. And they basically want you to think of the store as an entire unit and prepare effective strategies that convert onlookers to customers. Now, I submit that onlookers don't look out for hazards. Their senses are engaged in the visual merchandising and store design elements. Hence, can you negate notice? Now, I'll give you one story on a retailer where it was Nordstrom's. They had built a display, not a display. They were introducing a spring theme, and in a main cross aisle that went to the outside of the building and an exit, they had the visual merchandising person use carpet tiles that they would put together to make a design. And they did this rug that went about 8 feet, 9 feet long, and maybe 4 feet wide. And they did it with individual tiles. The problem is it wasn't beveled in a way that somebody wouldn't catch their toe on that first rug tile. So they catch their foot on the rug tile, and down they go. So I wound up going into Washington at a place that made these individual tiles. I bought a couple of them. I talked to them about it. So I had some understanding of it. And I said to the attorney, you know what? You got to depose the visual merchandising store design person, the person that is responsible for those folks. So they brought that person into a depot. And the question that I had them ask is, what considerations did you take into mind before you built that rug on that tile floor? And the answer was, oh, we don't think about safety. And the attorney says, after his jaw dropped, he said, wait a minute, you say that again? And the answer was, well, we don't think about safety. Okay, well, 2 days later, that case settled. So depending on where something having to do with visual merchandising and store design comes into play, that's where you might want to get that visual merchandising person involved. Okay, as I start to wrap up, lastly, if you take one thing back, well, let me do your questions first. So why don't we get on to the questions, and then I can wrap up on this one last piece of advice that may also help you at work.
Okay, perfect. So if everyone could type in the passcode again, which is store, that'd be perfect. And your first question, Bob, or your next question, have you ever used the store's internal surveillance system to argue against the typical lack of notice defense?
Read that to me one more time. Have I ever used the store's surveillance video to argue?
Yes. Have you ever used a store's internal surveillance system to argue against the typical lack of notice defense?
There's been a couple times where we've gotten a video that's run 30 minutes, and we've been able to argue that we know now, at least for 30 minutes, we saw none of your employees pass that area. And therefore, you have no idea how long that was down there, but we know at least it's down there for the 30 minutes of this videotape. I also had a case where we had it down there for about 45 minutes, and we actually felt we knew where it came from. And I had that in my report, that the video showed it started at this time, the video ended here, so that's X number of minutes. And then, of course, in the deposition, we asked those questions about, so when was the last time this area was inspected? We don't know. Why don't you know? Well, we just don't know. Is that why you don't do any documentation of any inspections you do? Probably. And therefore, you don't do any inspections. So you've already got that established in your supplementary request for production, because it's probably in their manual that they don't do it, or they've answered interrogatories that they don't do it. But yeah, there's been a couple times when it's been helpful to use that. But you got to really watch those videos, and you got to, again, try to get as much as you can.
Thank you. This was a follow-up when you said, when you were talking about the witness. What is a 30B6 witness?
That's what they call a corporate witness. And that's somebody from the corporation. So that might be a vice president of operations. So when they come down, they really don't know a lot about the particular incident that occurred in that store. You bring them down to find out, do you have written policies and procedures that deal with doing inspections of the store to satisfy your duty, exercise reasonable care to keep the store safe, and to exercise reasonable care to keep the aisles safe. What do you do as it relates to ensuring your employees understand safety policies and procedures, and what in fact is the safety policy and procedure of the store? So you're not drilling down to the particulars of the whys and the wherefores of the fall. You're trying to understand more globally what the corporation is doing to be proactive and to prevent these incidents. So that's what the 30D6 is.
Okay. Are there any standards about stores using and keeping videotapes?
Not a standard. Where you would typically find that in some cases, you will find it in their manuals. They may dictate that there's a minimum of 30 minutes of tape before the incident and 30 minutes of tape after the incident. There's also, I think it's ShopRite, they have a specific section on that, and they talk about getting it 2 hours before the incident and 2 hours after the incident. But I've done a lot of cases against ShopRite, and I've not seen 2 hours. I think the longest one I saw was maybe 40 minutes or something. So no, there's nothing that's really written in a standard or even in a custom and practice, other than where you might find it in a store safety manual. But the National Safety Council doesn't talk about that. Nothing that would be an ANSI standard talks about that.
Okay. How much notice does the retail store need for water on the floor, especially near freezers? What is your experience? How long do the stores maintain surveillance tapes?
Typically, they will have them for at least 2 weeks, sometimes 30 days. It just depends on the store. So that would kind of be your duration. So that's why you want to get these preservation letters in, if you can, early on. I think there was a second part to that question I didn't pick up on. Could you just read it one more time, please?
Yes. How much notice does the retail store need for water on the floor, especially near freezers? What is your experience?
Well, if they're doing I don't want to call it a standard. The custom and practice, if they're going to do a scheduled inspection, is typically 1 hour. So that's a benchmark for you there, 1 hour. Depending on the traffic in the store, the National Safety Council and some others talk about you need to be, that's not an in-stone number, but the hour at a minimum is what you have to do. But you also have to evaluate how busy the store is. And I'm sure you all know Saturdays and Sunday mornings are when the stores are the busiest. So in those particular situations, you want to be monitoring and doing scheduled inspections maybe every 30 minutes. And I think I talked about when, you got corn coming out in the spring, you better have somebody in produce standing next to that trash can, because you're going to have silk and you're going to have the coverings from the corn's going to be all over the floor. And, when you have displays when you have water, water's on sale, everybody and their brother's in the place. So you have to be cognizant of that, and you have to ensure yourself that you're doing these inspections in 30-minute, 15-minute increments. When you have bad inclement weather, you need to have a bucket and a mop right near that area. And there, typically, you'll be over there to dry mop that every 10 minutes to 15 minutes. So it just depends on circumstances, which is why you want to get weather reports when you have inclement weather, so you can see the amount of rain that's come down, and you can get that. There's a couple of websites you can get that stuff from. So it could range from 10 to 15 minutes with inclement weather. It could be constantly when you got produce specials going or other specials in the store and people are going to mob you. It could be 30 minutes if you start to build up volume of people and you want somebody around there walking the floor, looking for those hazards. At worst case, every hour.
Bob, it's 7 after 3, so I'm going to have you continue on with your presentations. And the questions that we do have left, if you don't mind, I'm going to email them to you.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So the one thing I want to leave you with is nothing is impossible to the person who doesn't have to do it themselves. Now, that has nothing to do with cases that you work with. That has to do with, I deal with a lot of paralegals and the folks that answer the phone and the secretaries. And what typically happens in businesses are somebody will say to their paralegal, well, I know it's 4 o'clock on Friday, but I need you to stay, and you actually have to work the weekend for me to get this appellate brief, these 2 appellate briefs filled out. So I understand, but you got to work. I know you got things with your family, but you got to work. So that paralegal stays and works the weekend, gets everything done, gets it on your desk at 9 o'clock. You roll in at 9:30, 9:45. They pop in and they say, so what did you think about the briefs? And what's the typical answer? Haven't read it yet. I don't know. And then you wonder why people don't want to stay and don't want to do things. So this is kind of just a reminder that nothing is impossible to the person who doesn't have to do it themselves. It's easy to say, stay tonight, come in Sunday, when you don't have to do it. When somebody else has to do it, just think about that. And then if you are guilty of this, make yourself unguilty, because you'll be wondering forever, why don't they want to work for me? Why don't they want to work with me? Because to you, nothing's impossible to the person who doesn't have to do it themselves. And I think there's one last thing. Yes, if you're involved with any outside support on a case, before you retain them, before you do your ROGs, not 30 days before the DED. And then consult with a retail safety expert that can help you. Like what I do is, if we were to work together on a case, I provide you with a supplementary request for production of documents. I also get you deposition questions. And then in the end, I'll get you admissions questions to wrap the whole thing up. So find somebody that can take some of that load off you. I know you do your initial request for documents, but you have a whole mindset within which you function to ask for certain documents. The expert kind of thinks in another realm, and they're asking for other things. So make sure you have somebody that can help you get that supplementary request for production, get depot questions for you, and also get admissions for you. And I think that'll help you out. We'll worry about those questions later. If any of you have a case that you would like to call and talk to me about, let me give you my number. And I work with TASA a lot, and we've agreed to do this. So if you have a case you want to talk with me about, call me on 973-219-3833, 973-219-3833. You can get me 24/7. If you call me at 3 in the morning, I'll answer the phone. I'll chat with you. But sometimes I may not be able to get back to you with the answer till 3 a.m. tomorrow morning. So anyway, so give me a call. Let's talk about the case. If it is something that ultimately we want to work together on, I'll make sure that TASA knows about that, because TASA will send you what the fee schedule for the engagement, and they'll also send you the contract. And then I can do the work. So 973-219-3833. So if you have a case now that you want to chat about, or you've got a case coming up you want to chat about, there's no charge for that stuff, and I usually spend a bit of time chatting with you all. So with that said, I think I'm done.
Thanks, Bob.
Okay, we can
please remember. No, not yet. No, that's okay. Please remember that if you are applying for CLE credit, you must have attended for the full 60 minutes of the presentation. You're also required to complete the survey at the end of the program, which is going to pop up on your screen when I end this webcast. I wanted to take this opportunity to thank everyone for attending, and most especially Bob Loderstedt for his time and efforts in creating this presentation. Again, like Bob said, if you'd like to speak with him, feel free to give him a call. And Bob, you can correct me if I'm wrong. You can reach Bob at 973-219-3833. And if you wanted to speak with someone from TASA, feel free to do so as well. 1-800-523-2319. We will be following up with you at some point in time with regard to this presentation. But all unanswered questions I will send over to Bob, and Bob will respond to you when he gets a chance. So this concludes our program for today, and thank you all so much for attending. Bye-bye.